Hello and welcome to a special edition of Talking Europe, in which I'm pleased to welcome Britain's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. He's in Paris to boost Franco-British defence ties, which were enshrined in the Lancaster House treaties of 2010. The two governments consider those ties to be particularly important as Britain adjusts to a new role in the world after leaving the European Union. Ben Wallace joins me from the UK ambassador's residence in the French capital. Mr. Wallace, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with the tensions between the West and Russia over Ukraine. You've said in the past that NATO still has something of a Cold War mentality. Do you think NATO's been outmaneuvered by Russia?
Well, I think what Russia spotted, and that was my point when I made those comments, is that if you sort of sit and wait in a very static environment, your adversaries will use sub-threshold methods to weaken your position or indeed to get ahead of you. And I think what we have seen in many areas has been Russia using those methods, whether that is cybercrime, espionage, we've seen assassinations, as we saw obviously in Salisbury, has used a range of methods that NATO in the past hasn't been prepared for. And I think the work of NATO 2030, the reform programme, has been all about NATO moving to recognise those are threats that we need to deal with. And so it's now in the right direction. But it's absolutely the case that Russia have been, in my view, clever at preparing the ground or doing things before we were ready to do something about it.
The British government sounds more hawkish on Russia than France and Germany, for example. On this side of the channel, one sometimes gets the impression that Britain is moving away from European positions and aligning with the UK. Is that a deliberate move post-Brexit? How do you see that?
No, I think, look, Britain is obviously shaped partly by the use of a nerve agent on its own soil against both Russians, and indeed a British citizen was murdered by officers of the GRU. I think that, of course, is going to shape our attitude towards a country that is supposedly acting in a civilized way. And that, plus what we've seen them around the world being engaged in, of course, makes Britain somewhat determined to push back that malign influence that we've seen. And to be fair, there are many countries in Europe that feel the same way. This is not a sort of Britain feels one way and the rest of Europe feels the other. I regularly meet with my counterparts across NATO and indeed in Scandinavia and the Nordic countries, and they all feel very similar.
Let me ask you about French-UK defence questions, and I want to quote to you something that the former British ambassador to Paris, Peter Ricketts, said earlier this month. He said, "We have not seen a new flagship UK-French project that will take us forward for the next decade. We have seen projects falling away, such as the Future Combat Aircraft. A hit, clearly, from Brexit." What's your response to that?
Well, I think that doesn't reflect the history of aerospace programmes before and after membership of the EU. We have loads of programmes over the last decade. Some have been great successes. For example, the Jaguar aeroplane, where France and Britain were very close. The Puma helicopters, for example, that we still use. And we've had programmes that never came to fruition. That's nothing to do with the EU membership.
But when it comes to a really... I think, sorry to interrupt, I think he was talking about a major flagship project that everyone can point to as symbolic of the future of Franco-UK defence. This is something that's missing at the moment, isn't it?
Well, no. I mean, we collaborate on a number of projects already. We collaborate on part of our nuclear project. That's incredibly important for both nations. We collaborate in our organisation of our forces, the CJEF, the Sea Joint Expeditionary Force grouping that we've worked to bring online and is a mechanism for should we deploy together. That's absolutely real and solid and being exercised, and we'll continue to use that. And on many things, we already collaborate together. The A400 is a European project of the A400 transport aircraft, and indeed in my recent defence reforms, we're going to be letting go of our Hercules aircraft and investing and continue to build on our fleet of A400. So I think if you're looking for a project of the moment, of course, a number of countries, and that's the same within Europe, it's not just a Britain-Europe again, are trying to settle on the future type of aircraft. So, for example, FCAS, which is Britain, Sweden and Italy collaborating on an aircraft, is obviously different from the German-French collaboration. But that doesn't mean to say that's where it's going to end up. And this is not a EU thing at all. And people seem to forget most aerospace projects over the last 30, 40 years have been driven really by who are the customers. And in European defence, there are very few spenders who buy large equipment programs. France, Germany, Britain, Italy, they're the big four, and that's what drives aerospace programs together, and that will continue to drive it no matter what our status is within the European Union.
Well, some of your allies have been concerned, I think it's fair to say, certainly in Washington, about the cuts in army personnel numbers, which your government's decided to do. Several thousand army personnel will be cut by 2025. Why should Beijing or Moscow take you seriously when they see you cutting those numbers?
Because Beijing and Moscow are themselves investing in technologies that mean you don't need so much mass in the long term. I mean, you can have as many people as you like on a battlefield, but that didn't really work very well in the First World War. Technologies coupled with force multipliers, coupled with the right strategies and tactics, coupled with alliances. And here's the big key between Britain, Europe, and Russia and China. Russia and China don't have any alliances. They don't actually have many friends. Europe, NATO, the United States, we work together. Our strength is our alliances, but also we've got to make sure we have battle-winning capabilities, and we have to make sure we are prepared for the type of battle that will come tomorrow, not fighting yesterday's wars.
Sure, but I mean, China is investing in technology and it's increasing its conventional forces. It's expanding its navy significantly.
We're increasing our frigates and destroyers. We'll have more by the middle of this decade than we have now. And at the same time, by using technology, we'll have them available for longer days at sea. I mean, there's the other part of having defense capability is we want our capability to be forward and used and operational. And the Russians know that. That's why they are often at a greater readiness and a greater forward presence. I could have lots of ships tied up alongside, but that isn't going to deter anyone. That isn't going to change anything. What we need to make sure is we have a force that's ready and deployable, a force that is capable of beating our adversaries, and a force that is ready and able to work with alliances. Because, you know, I'm here because it's very important that Britain and France are interoperable in our equipment programs and indeed in our deployments. And, you know, if you're saying, will Britain on its own take on China and Russia? Well, I mean, it's not a surprise to anyone. I don't think that's going to happen any more than France or any more than Germany is going to take them on their own. We have always been defense alliances that bring people together. It's absolutely the case. We will still be able to warfight at scale. We are still going to be an expeditionary country. But I haven't been making these decisions in an environment of cuts. I'm getting an extra £24 billion over the next 4 years. I'll spend nearly £200 billion on British defence in the next 4 years. So that's a rising tide of funding, and that's allowed me to make the right decisions to modernise a force to fight tomorrow's battles.
You've said that Britain has sometimes been too dependent on other countries in the past, and that Britain can now pick and choose its own battles. Maybe you can give me an example of a hotspot or a conflict around the world where you can imagine Britain acting on its own. So if we forget multilateralism for a second, or alliances with the US, or the relationship with NATO, can you imagine such a situation where Britain really does do something on its own?
Let's be clear. 99% of the time, we're going to be in a NATO. NATO is our number one priority, a NATO outfit or a NATO deployment alongside. But on some, we're going to join the United States. On others, we're hopefully going to join France or Germany or wherever. And that means we just have to have a force that can bring to the effect of the party, bring to the moment all the right capabilities we need, depending on what we're doing. So Africa, for example, be a very different force layout. It could be Britain on its own. It could be Britain with an African partner. It could be Britain, France, and the United Nations, as it is in Mali. All of that is about giving me choices in policy.
Right. Well, what about the Sahel? Sahel, just briefly because we're running out of time, but France is obviously very concerned today in the light of the events in Chad yesterday and the death of President Deby. What's your thinking on helping the French Operation Barkhane and/or the G5 Sahel group in the coming weeks and months?
Well, first of all, at Barkhane, we're sending an extra helicopter to support the heavy lift Chinooks, and at the same time, we're out in the UN deployment alongside with over 300 British troops. Look, this is again an example of where Britain and France absolutely align. You know, Africa is a key area for Europe. It's a key area both for our interests, our trade interests, but it's a key area for our security, and it's in our interest that there is stability and counter-radicalisation right across Africa, whether it's East or West Africa. And so we're very worried and sad by the loss, obviously, of the president of Chad. You know, we totally condemn the use of force to try and get rid of a government that's in place, and we'll do everything we can to support both our friends, such as France, but also those countries in producing that stability that's so important. And I think that's the real key here, is that, you know, we have to recognise that what we don't do over there comes back to haunt us all over here. And I think the lessons of the last 20 years has meant that we have to, as forces, as defence, realise the best defence is sometimes being over there, being abroad, investing in resilience of other countries and friends, because that's the best way of keeping the troubles coming to our shores.
Okay, we'll have to end it there. Thank you so much for your time, Ben Wallace, UK Defence Secretary, and thanks to our viewers on the programme. Goodbye for now.